want to call the meeting to order?
Yes,
And
all right.
go over?
This is the June 17th, 2019 meeting of the Environmental Review Board. The first order of business, I guess technically we have to approve the minutes. We have a motion to approve the minutes from April and the February meetings.
Motion to approve the minutes from April and February meetings.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Next is a request for an extension of the permit at 3 Circle Drive.
John, there's some people here in the audience, so I will get them and
Okay.
let them know.
It's nice when it's late this late.
Really good. It's even more discouraging when it gets dark though. As you know, it's like midnight.
Still up when it starts.
Hey guys. How are you?
All right.
Good, how are you?
Good.
You're not to me the most depressing day of the year.
June
June
21st,
21st,
yeah.
June 22nd.
Yeah, it just keeps
Downhill from there.
Okay. So, Steve, you want to tell us briefly what's going on?
If you recall, the Franklin property, the 3 Circle, that is before your time, Ted, but I've been and John and David were on the board then. And there was a tree permit, that was filed by, the neighbors that, appealed the decision of my decision with the tree permit, and then you guys, were the approving authority for the tree permit that was issued. And part of that agreement was that the Franklins had to replace trees, based on, the Chapter 121, and so in the original permit, they were given a year to implement, the tree replacement, and it expired without them doing it, and we got a complaint from, the neighbors, the Meanies, and that, so we investigated and contacted the owners, and they asked for an extension. They indicated that they had some initial difficulties with the nursery, and also just some financial and personal issues. But they asked if they could have an extension until the end of this year to plant the trees. So that's in a sense what my memo to the board indicated. And I put a copy of the prior, permit that I think all of you had seen. So they're requesting an extension till the end of the year to complete the required tree replacement.
Anybody have any questions or discussion points?
Good, I don't have any questions about what is in the memo.
But the neighbors are here. Yes.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether you're here just to listen and
Would you like to
see
be
what
heard?
happens, or is there?
Yeah, we would like to be heard, if that's okay. I just think that,
Briefly, please.
briefly, okay, you guys gave us the option of allowing them to cut them down or not in return for these trees being planted. And the permit was for it to be done within a year. They've had 16 months at this point. There have been plenty of good planting days. There's been plenty of time to obtain stock from the nursery. And as far as financial, the father who owns the property, he sold a couple years ago, he sold his property in downtown Mount Kisco for, it was $3 or $4 million for commercials. They don't have financial problems. So they just really don't want to do this. And we obviously want it done as soon as we can. There's the green issue. They have no trees on their property. There's the carbon,
Sure.
sequestration, all that kind of stuff. So I don't really see why they should have any more extra time. I understand that you can't force them to do it like tomorrow, but in my opinion, it should have already been done. But being that it's gone past this point now, I think the end of the year is probably too long, because I think what you're going to find is that they're going to say in December, it's too cold to plant. We can't do it. Or we can't get the stock from the nurseries at that point. I would say that at the outside, I would give them till like the end of October to do the planting, because then there's adequate root development, et cetera, before the cold weather sets in. Would that be correct, Steve, as far as the optimal time to?
Well, yeah, going between now, I mean, September and October are the
Right.
ideal months, you know, for planting.
Okay.
I can see how that would be very frustrating. You guys have been without the trees for a long time.
Well, if you recall, we did put in 30 of our own along the back.
Okay.
So green giant arborvitaes, but they refused to augment that with more along that property line. They're gonna put them elsewhere on their property.
Did you have any problem finding the stock?
No.
We planted in October of 2017. We had no problem finding stock at all.
We
Came
just
from
called Michael's
a nursery in Pennsylvania.
And they got them from the nursery in Pennsylvania, and there was no problem with getting them delivered. And they were 8 to 10 feet. They claimed that they took a picture, and we had planted 16 6-foot ones along the property line, which is, I don't know where they got that from, but it's 8 to 10 foot hemlocks, I mean, arborvitaes in them now.
And at this point, some of them are 10 to 12 feet. Yeah.
They're growing. And last summer, the son who's in the house, actually rented a big giant auger, and he dug 6 deep holes on the other side of his property, and then nothing happened. So, you know, we saw him doing that, so we assumed that the trees were going in, but they didn't, so we're very frustrated. And
Yeah, it sounds very frustrating.
it's really up to you guys.
But yeah, it's up to you guys, and then going forward, I think, well, Sue knows better than I did. Steve mentioned something to Sue about how if you can send a letter that if they don't do the planting by October, it automatically goes to court. They have to appear in
And
court.
that's the recourse that the board would have, is we could take, we would have to go through justice court and serve, another violation.
I'd like the board to consider it.
Can I ask you, what's the price to plant a tree of that size?
They're not cheap. They're over $300 a tree.
Including planting.
Approximately.
Well, I think we spent, for the 30, including planting and the trees, it was about $17,000. So it's a lot of money.
And how many are they obligated to put in?
They're required to put in
12.
12.
They're supposed to do it, they ought to do it. And it doesn't sound like anything really is gonna happen between October 31 and December 31.
Right.
Gives them.
I mean, if it doesn't happen by October, then it's probably not gonna
It's not
happen
gonna
until
happen.
spring, right?
Right.
But I guess one advantage to shortening the period would be that if there's any enforcement mechanism that has to take place, then if it starts right after October, then it has time to run its course and still be able to get
In for the spring.
in the springtime, as opposed to first having to start an enforcement proceeding in January.
Right.
Is there a reason not to shorten that?
No, I mean, my suggestion might be to do October 1st, because then, if we put on to inspect, and if it's not done by then, there's still an opportunity to put them in, by mid-November. And we can put a little pressure on them, and then if they don't do it, then, our recourse is to, serve another violation.
Well, could it be done in 2 phases? Show proof that they have purchased the trees by a certain date, so that they can't say that they're not available. And then say by, whether it's October or November, whatever the right date is, that they must be planted by then. And that way, at least, the materials are sourced to make sure that it could be put in. Because if they're not purchased and ready to go by a certain time, then there might be a reason that they can't be,
Right.
if they wait till too late.
So what do you want to say, August 15th? August,
Oh, it's what, it's July 1, so give them a month, like first week in August. With installation by what, November 1,
fine.
October.
October 1.
October 1?
Sound okay?
Thank you very much, we're very grateful.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
So I'll follow up with a memo to the neighbor that
Can I ask one other question? There's supposed to be this 5-year guarantee on the trees. Who is the one who's going to be responsible for overseeing that? Is it the ERB or is it going to be the environmental court?
it'll be delegated, I'm pretty sure, to the environmental coordinator.
Okay.
To
Just
do
want to know
the,
who's,
to check to make sure that that's being done.
right. Okay, terrific.
Thank you very
All right,
much, I
thank you,
appreciate
gentlemen,
your
I
time
appreciate
and
it.
good luck with we're out up there. We're gonna be here
Yeah,
a
looks like
while.
we could have a long night.
Have a good one.
Thank you, you too.
So do we have a motion to approve the extension as modified pursuant to the conversation tonight?
Motion to extend the permit to October 1 with the caveat that the
Proof purchased by
material is
August 1.
purchased by.
Is August 1, is that enough time? I mean, are they
Yeah,
up
I mean,
against
to
it in some way?
purchase them, I think would be fine.
Yeah.
Because that still gives them, a good month and a half to arrange planting or delivery.
They just have to order them. That can be done on a phone call.
Yeah.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
So next one is laminates.
Next is laminating, update.
Dun, dun, dun.
Good evening.
Hello again.
The golfers are here.
Golfers are here. No golf, but the golfers are here.
said that out there too. I work today.
You guys again? Eventually you gotta get it done.
Let's hope tonight.
That's why we're here. So good evening, just for the record, Brad Schwartz from Zarin Steinmetz, representing the applicant, obviously with Seth and Glenn Tyser. So I think you're all fully familiar with the plan. Obviously happy to go through it quickly if you like, but we got our planning board approvals a couple of weeks ago, obviously with a number of conditions, this being one of them. But so we got our planning board approvals here tonight, hopefully to ask your board to approve this resolution. And then away we go. With the hope to start work sometime in the fall, where one of the conditions of the planning board approval was to get approvals with DEP. So what we're doing is just making sure that our plan complies with the DEP requirements. That was a comment that Bob sealed, so that's probably the next sort of municipal or governmental hurdle.
What is DEP? You have to.
DEP, it's their stormwater requirements. So it's just marrying the DEP stormwater requirements with the town requirements and making sure we get one SWIP that both the town and DEP are all good with, so that's, other than that, I think the plan is in pretty good shape. It's been responsive to, I think, your board's comments and the planning board's comments throughout the process. So I know we've been here and it's been a long, arduous process, but thank you for all your attention to it. And again, respectfully ask that you approve the resolution tonight.
And Brad and I had a conversation earlier today, and he had asked for consideration of a couple of minor changes, and I thought maybe it might be helpful if you want to go through those. Did everyone get that today?
So I had one comment to that. Given the history of having somebody else get involved in the project, the entity that would be submitted, I am concerned that they will not understand the history of what went on, nor will they be properly understanding what's required to make sure that this plan gets put in place and there's not a partial repeat. So that's my concern with that one paragraph change to not identify now who the entity is that's going to do.
Can we require oversight by the LA?
So that's what I think that the original condition tried to capture. I think Glenn and Seth have all the institutional knowledge here, so I think what you were trying to achieve was that Glenn and Seth would be the landscape architects that implement the maintenance plan for the next 10 years. And our concern with that was whether the landowner, right, applicant, for whatever reason, chose to go with a different landscape architect, or if these guys moved, or who knows what happens where life takes us in 10 years. So understanding sort of what was driving that request and the concern that someone who has knowledge and familiarity with the plan is the one implementing the maintenance protocol is sort of what led to the suggested.
That's what led to the issue to start with, right?
Right, but what I'm suggesting now, but now, there's an annual requirement to submit those reports, and so we would have to, we're obligating ourselves to identify that if for whatever reason, if Seth and Glenn are not the landscape architects who would be implementing the plan, we're now obligated to inform Steve, come on in, sit down, however many times it takes, do a site visit, to make sure that whoever it is gets brought up to speed to Steve's satisfaction, because I hear your concern, I get it, so we're trying to address it without committing, we just,
Locking
we
yourself
just
into
can't
one
lock,
individual.
and not because we don't love them and because we don't think they can do it.
Things happen.
It's
You know,
just,
but
yeah, and so.
It can be on the applicant, right, that either this firm or another licensed landscape architecture firm certifies the execution of the plan as drawn and the maintenance portion of it.
And we're even going further than that by saying that we're gonna, if there's someone else besides these two guys, we're gonna announce it, let you know it, and come on in and Steve will educate them to make sure that they know they're brought right up to speed. So we thought that was a fair compromise to address your concern while not.
Handcuffing you to a commitment.
And one thought too is maybe as part of the permit is we could specify that Benedict and Ticehurst, are required or to be retained by the applicant to oversee the initial installation of all plantings and the initial certification. That all all plans are done, comply, the installation complies with the approved plan. So at least you have that assurance that, they're, following it through the planting stage.
And even the monitoring plan is
It's in there already.
is being designed by these guys.
Yeah.
Right, so this change is not even for design or implementation of that, it's only subsequent implementation. If at some point during the 10 years.
Do they have an annual certification requirement?
Yeah, it's an annual report that's, has to meet certain standards and protocols. So, so the town has the ability at any time during that monitoring to question and,
I know we probably can't get away with asking for approval rights over any new firm, but would there be a problem if we?
With such approval, won't be unreasonably withheld.
Well, no, I'm not even sure that we can get there, but more, we could strengthen this instead of just advise the town, maybe give the town prior notice and an opportunity to consult in the process of hiring the new architect.
Why couldn't it be an approval that the entity is acceptable?
I'm not sure that we're allowed to go that far. We've never done that before.
Yeah, and I think that would be an unusual step too, David. There's a licensed architect that can do the job, and that's who the client wants to hire. I think at the end of the day, they
Right.
have that right, but I'm fine with a consultation, that way.
Prior notice and consultation in
Because if
advance of
Steve's
hiring.
Steve's gonna say, you know what, these guys, they're a mess, don't go, and then I'm
Right,
happy to
and
get
because
that.
that way we let the client know
Ahead of time.
if there are problems, this
Yeah.
is what the possible downside is for you.
Right. So I have no
So-
problem with some like consultation, advisory, only,
and
input.
do you want it to be a recommendation from the environmental coordinator to this board? That.
As to what?
No, I would leave
Is
it,
it new or-
I would leave it to the environmental coordinator just to sit. I'm just trying to think through theoretically what would happen if the coordinator had an issue.
I think at that point, we would take it under advisement. I think at the end of the day, with all due respect, I think we could still go ahead and hire that person. I think just practically, if we sat down with Steve and heard, you know what, I got a real problem with this person, here's why, off the record, I'd like to think we would then switch gears.
Go in a different
But-
direction.
But I think, you know, in response to your question, I think all it could really be is sort of an advisory heads up, and then it's up to the applicant to decide whether to go forward.
But then, for all intents, the town has no say, because you can
Yeah,
just do it anyway. and
Well,
the paragraph means nothing.
Unless the problem was so severe that it led to a violation of the plan, and then
Exactly.
we've got jurisdiction again, we could issue a new violation.
Exactly. If it turns out that Steve was right, that they were so deficient and lacked all the credentials, that
Right.
then they don't fulfill, then that's where your hook is.
Right, remember, I mean, there were,
Never even think of it unless it had been through that. That's the reason.
right, but
Guys,
I
look,
think, but what they
I-
did last time, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it was the architect, it was the contractor. Right, so hopefully, you know, we wouldn't have seen something like that from a licensed architect.
Right, there was
No,
no,
there was
no
a
architect on
contract.
site and the
Right.
contractor
Right.
went.
Cover the scope
Right.
of what we had done and, yeah.
Right, and so,
And
you know.
one other aspect that's in this as well is there's a performance bond, you know, for,
Correct.
you know, the initial planting as well, so we have, you know, some built-in, you know, safeguards that, you know, we didn't have, you know, the first time.
Just thinking it through for a second, I just don't know, I'm just thinking it through with you guys, right, that Steve, do you even want that kind of a language, right, to sort of put an affirmative obligation yourself for some consult or even an advisory recommendation, because if it's negative for any reason, and, you know, look, we're all in this field sort of together,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you would rather just sort of have an informal discussion offline and not sort of have an
Well,
obligation
but
here.
we can't ensure that that's gonna happen.
No, I realize that, but I'm just playing it out that if it's in here, then so
We don't have
so
to
then-
specify what the nature and the breadth of the consultation is.
That's
either.
fine.
I think, you know, if we have in here, you know, that there's gotta be, you know, prior written notice and an opportunity to consult before the hire is made. You know, I think that gives us enough, input to be able to at least know what's going on.
Is there a way we could tweak this
We
language?
can, do you wanna do it now, or can that just be, can you approve subject to working out that final language?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Very well.
I captured what you did, prior notice and opportunity to consult before hire.
Right.
We'll figure out how to massage.
Yep. Okay. And what was the thinking on reducing the contingency from 20 to 10%?
And Brad pointed out in our, we don't have a built-in contingency in the code, it's just been something that's been done internally, you know, by the town engineer. And based on the 10 years and the cost of the material, I felt that, you know, we had enough leverage, you know, with the 10-year monitoring plan, you know, and 35% cost to intervene, and so I was willing to consider reducing it.
Okay. Anybody else on the board have any questions? No. So again, entertain a motion to approve the permit as outlined in the materials, subject to the change that'll be drafted and submitted for approval with respect to the environmental coordinator being given prior written notice of any potential change in landscape architect and an opportunity to consult in connection with that hire prior to its taking place. We have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Thank you, good night.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
good.
Moving forward.
We'll miss you guys.
I'm sure you will.
How long do you think that'll take to implement?
I'm gonna guess it's all of the fall, all of the spring, and we'll have to see how far we get, but we'd like to wrap it up as quickly as possible. There's gonna be no delay on certain,
Just
our part.
It's gonna go through the winter and spring.
Yeah, you're never gonna get all that work done in this fall, is my guess. So, and again, the planting schedule, a lot of the heavy stuff can get done now or in the fall, and then start some of that planting if there's time, and then finish up hopefully in the spring.
New York City DEP takes a long time as well to get.
We can't start the work until we get the DEP.
Right, that's the key. Thank you.
Take care.
I'm not sure, John, if anyone's here for this, but
Oh, okay, for shaking. Whole lot of shaking going on.
yeah, they are here. So.
Ah,
Hey.
how are you?
Congratulations.
He's a ghost.
He's a ghost.
Okay. This is the Shaken Properties, 8 Brookside Circle. Up for a wetland permit.
I prepared a draft wetland permit, which, did you receive? that?
Yes, I did, thank you.
Okay. And are there any questions on the permit itself? I mean, it has the standard information referencing the plan, and then the other thing I asked if you could, sign and stamp, the set of plans, because your name didn't appear on the,
Oh,
on the plot plan at all.
Oh, okay.
Want to make sure you get credit, And then we'll need a 5-year wetland buffer monitoring and maintenance, and we can email you the town's protocol for that, but you just have to, prepare it and submit that.
Okay. What does that look like?
Pardon me?
What does that entail?
What we have is whenever there's any mitigation projects done for wetlands or buffer areas, it's a monitoring and maintenance plan to make sure that the plantings survive and are sustainable. And so there's certain protocols that, you have to guarantee a certain success rate of the plantings and, protect them from deer. Deer browse is a major concern, so we always put in, requirement for deer fencing as well. During
That was one
mitigation.
question, yeah. Can we go through this? Do you want, we only got this today.
Oh, sure,
Hopefully, yeah, I'm sure you get,
Yeah.
it's our first time seeing it, so apologies,
Yeah,
I'm sure
that's
you've
fine.
seen it 1,000 times. But,
I mean, what the conditions of the permit are is that, it's just referencing the, site plan that you
Yes.
submitted in the landscape, plan.
yeah,
So those two plans are referenced as the, those
The
are the
governing.
ones that are the approved plans, that, you
Okay.
have to adhere to.
right, because we saw some of these things that weren't discussed the last couple of meetings, like, a couple of things if we could go through, like, we picked with Ryan, like, all plants that deer aren't gonna eat, because we know deer, like, so the idea of having deer fencing for 5 years around plants that the deer are gonna avoid and have a look at that seems to me to be
There's-
onerous as well as
In
an
my
eyesore.
30-plus years' experience, there's no such thing as a foolproof deer-resistant plant. Yeah, all the native material does get browsed extensively as well. And so that's why we've learned just from trial and error over many years that, you have to protect them. I mean, it's for your own benefit because you're subject to replacing. If they don't survive, you're gonna have to replace them within that 5-year period. So it's to your advantage to make sure that they do as well as possible. And the only way you can guarantee that is either through some type of fencing Or you can do deer repellents, but you have to make sure that that's done on a, routine and regular basis throughout the year. I mean, that's another route you can go, it's just that most homeowners decide that, fencing is much better because it's easier to maintain and, it keeps, keeps the material, healthy.
So in this case, what you're asking for is deer fencing around each of the planting areas?
That would make the most sense because of the way the plan is designed, and, instead of doing around the perimeter, of the
Yeah.
yard, is to do around the plantings. And you can do these, there's a lot of mesh netting that blends in very well.
I mean, I just don't agree that deer eat every plant, like respectfully, like.
You're gonna have some survival, but, the board has found that over the years, it just,
So you want a
Yeah, we
fencing around plants for 5 years in a public area, that's what you're gonna look at for 5 years. And is this,
unless if you wanna guarantee every year that, if you get a lot of loss, you're gonna replant it every year. You're basically implementing the same plan for every year if you get a lot of deer growth.
well, yeah, I think respectfully, I trust Rhina, who I've worked with for a decade, that she steered us right in all our previous plantings.
We've seen this same type of plant material on,
If it gets cold enough and icy and snowy enough, and they'll eat anything.
But that's fine, like in the winter, I'd wanna protect it maybe from wind and whatever else, but the idea of all summer having a fence around
Oh,
plantings.
I don't know that anybody's talking about it being up year round.
Oh, I thought you meant.
wasn't-
Oh, okay, yeah, that's what we,
It-
yeah,
It's
that's what
not
we
clear.
assume
It's
that.
not
Yeah,
clear.
so,
we usually require,
If you put it up, it usually stays up, because you don't put it up and take it down, put it up.
I've seen that with people in the winter, that have put it up for the winter, just so that when a deer are very hungry and there's not much else, they do, I've seen them eat deer.
Yeah, cause, yeah, in the winter they do get very hungry.
In the summer, if it's,
They'll eat it in the
Deer
spring
resistant.
when they're.
yeah, I feel like it's our red, like, I mean, if you guys are okay with it.
it is at your own risk. The 5-year, monitoring and maintenance is there, and for example, there's an 85% success rate, that you have to maintain
right,
over 5 years. So if you wanna, fence it in during the winter months and take it down at your own risk, you can do that. It's just, our experience is that the longer it stays up, the more success rate you have.
I mean, we have a vested interest in it succeeding as well, like, we think it'll improve the property and the drainage and everything
There's
else.
no risk, right?
Okay.
Right, and I don't think there's any minimum specification about the nature of the fencing either,
No,
right?
no, it can be any type you wanna put up. It could be decorative if you wanna, invest in something, permanent or, around the plantings as well, but.
okay.
Can we talk about, 4 makes sense to us, 5, you had a question if you don't mind, like, the idea of chicken and egg, right, like, we only wanna put in, can we do something where erosion control is subject to the building permit, and the building permit is subject to the erosion control, as opposed, because we're not gonna do improvements for a year to the
Right,
structure.
what we wanna do is we
so-
wanna do the plantings now and then the
Yeah, that's
building
what-
permit,
that's
we're gonna
what-
file
that's what
within
it
the next
says
year.
prior to the issuance of the building permit.
Okay,
Okay.
alright, I just didn't know if that needed to be done.
That's only done
Alright.
at the
That's
time
done
when you
at the
get a
time.
building permit.
Excellent, okay. This was fine.
Yep, 6 was fine. Oh, 7, the question was, the permit be prominently displayed at the project site, so a permit for the plantings
The
to be
wetlands
displayed?
permit, the wetlands permit that you receive.
So does
is
that
just-
go with the building permit on the
Yes.
house at the
Yeah.
time of the building
Yeah.
permit?
Yeah.
Gotcha,
Okay.
alright, that makes sense. Okay,
That has to do with the building, so
okay,
that'll
so
go.
the erosion controls that goes with, in tandem with the building.
Well, that's what we gotta find out. It's-
So 9.
Did you say that the planning is gonna come before?
We
The
wanted
construction,
to
so-
start the planting so that it would,
Grow.
it
So
would
you
grow,
take over.
and
don't
then,
have to have a huge sign, but the wetlands permit should be up
Okay.
when
Like the-
the,
right.
when we're
garage
doing the
window?
planting?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Just some
fine.
guidance,
Just
that's what to
to
do.
say when you're
Yeah.
doing the work.
when you're doing the planting.
Okay,
Right, it's
so
not-
when we have,
So
We
like a
just
week
put it in the
before
production
you want
minutes.
it in, so people are aware that it's happening.
yeah.
Gotcha.
So what I would suggest is like, when you're ready
In the
to start
garage
the
or something.
plantings, contact, my office Dennis Corelli is taking over as the town's environmental coordinator, so you're,
Okay,
he'll be the point of contact. But,
okay.
when you're ready, just contact us for, have a brief meeting just to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Great.
Right, and like it's in a 9, what does that look like? Because I know you've spoken with Ryan and talked with her, you've seen the map.
I mean, usually what I prefer to do is meet with the landscape architect, prior to the installation, just to go through, so that we both are on the same page.
At the site?
At the site, yeah.
So, okay, cause she's gonna be there.
She should be there
I did
when it
doing
put
goes
it,
work.
yeah.
Do you want her to have stuff laid out in the general area? Is that what you're looking for there? or-
No, just to go through the overall plan and make sure nothing's changed or anything, of any significance, on that. And then you're free to go ahead and do the install. And then, when, as part of the requirement is, she'll have to certify the plantings.
Yep, Right, and I just want to be cost
And
effective, like if,
at that time, when she does that we usually like to meet with them at the same time and go through the plan just to check for compliance. It just saves a step if we can do it together.
I'm just trying to understand timing, because it would have to be before we order the plants in case he
No.
doesn't agree with something.
No, you can go ahead and order the plants,
The plan
unless
was
it's
approved.
sometimes what happens when you order the plants is something's not available, so,
Okay,
Renee will have to substitute, a different plant, and,
okay.
we just need to know about that, to make sure it's,
Right. I'm trying to
Yeah.
save money where I can, because every time I bring Ryan out, it costs money.
No,
right?
don't, just,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, I'm only talking about just in the beginning, the initial, and then, once everything's done, unless she has problems with certain issues or availability of plants.
Just go up for an inspection at the end.
And then we do an inspection at the end.
Okay.
And because, if you're gonna be doing the plantings first, once you get the sign off, we can start the 5-year plan at that point. It's dependent upon, getting everything installed and, having her certify it,
Okay.
according to the plan, and then that'll start your 5-year monitoring.
I'm assuming we can get our hands on like a boilerplate,
Yeah,
what one looks like.
I can send it to you tomorrow,
Okay,
or somebody in the boilerplate.
And, go ahead, sorry.
So the plantings, we'd like to get in now, the drainage, obviously, when the construction is being done, the driveway is basically the last thing that's done,
Right.
so that would be the last.
Yeah, and that'll be tied into your building permit.
Right, okay.
And then 10, what are you accounting for with 10? Is there someone else that,
That's a
Needs to
boiler,
bless
it's a
this,
boilerplate.
okay.
I mean, in your case, you didn't trip the wires for New York City DEP or anything. It's mostly just to the health department or, engineering department or.
Which, we have to go to the building department.
Right. And unfortunately, the scale of your improvements doesn't trip a lot of it.
all right, thank you for that.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
So, how do you, improvements?
With that in mind, subject to,
Them submitting the 5-year maintenance and.
well, that's in the text of the permit.
Yeah.
And so we don't have to modify anything that's in here.
Right.
Right, okay. So,
Yeah, just receive it, but then come later.
so do we have a motion to approve this permit as prepared by the environmental coordinator?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay?
Great,
Thank
thank you very
Can I
much.
just take one final question? So since we're not gonna start the construction for about a year, the permit will stay open till we put the silt fence up? Or, because the silt fence would normally be a requirement of the building permit, wouldn't it?
Right, I mean, for the plantings, I'm not requiring silt-fence. I mean, it would only be for the gravel, for the driveway,
Right.
when you bring that up
And will
you know,
that
just to
be,
work.
will that be a condition of the building permit too?
It should be.
Yeah, the erosion controls would be a condition of the
Okay.
building permit.
So I know where you're going is whether we're gonna need an extension on this permit.
Or can you just complete the permit for the plantings and then the driveway and the silt fence for the driveway and the building will be part of the building permit?
I think it probably will have to be continued, because the way the town works is the building permit is really the key thing. That you have to have a building permit to basically do almost anything, so. So I think it would have to probably end up being extended, which is not a problem because you've already implemented it. It would just be, a request to extend the permit.
Thank you.
The permit is good for a year. It can be extended easily.
Okay. Good. Yeah, since most of the work will be done except for just the silt fence.
Mhm.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell them
So-
that we're gonna go into executive session?
Well, let's do it, and then you can tell me.
Okay.
Close the door.
Like to make well, no, you gotta do the motion in open session. So, I entertain a motion to go into executive session for the purposes of discussing litigation-related matters pursuant to section 105 of the open meetings law.
Second. Oh, motion, so moved.
Second?
Second.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. It's now 9 o'clock. We've completed the discussion in executive session, so I'll entertain a motion to end executive session and go back into public session.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hello, Vinnie.
Aye.
Okay, good evening. This is the BARD application at 931 Hardscrabble Road. The applicant submitted a revised plan since the last meeting at which we discussed the project and since the May site visit. And there have certainly been improvements in the new plan. The mitigation offered is very generous. There have been slight modifications in the design of the pool. The spa has been removed as a separate piece and is now to be incorporated into the pool. Unfortunately, the revised plan still involves a significant encroachment into the wetland buffer to the tune, I believe, of 117 square feet of pool structure itself. And based on that, and based on the previous discussions that we've had, and based on the plain language of the wetlands ordinance, which basically precludes us from analyzing or requiring a mitigation plan unless there is no feasible or practicable alternative to the proposal. And in this case, given the history, given the fact that there was a previous design that was submitted that complies with the ordinance, stays out of the buffer, except for some of the drainage, the board at this point is really kind of constrained. And we wish that this proposal had taken to heart some of the observations that we made at the last meeting, that we made at the site visit. But given the fact that it has not, I think we're left with two choices. And it's basically your choice at this point, yours and your client's choice. We can either go back, ask you to take it back once more, and give us an alternative that works, consistent with the ordinance. If that's not an option that you or your client want to propose or want to avail yourselves of at this point, and I think if we're obligated to render a decision one way or another on this application, I think the decision is going to be that the permit's denied.
Overall, more disturbance, but not the hardscape. There was nothing over the line, not even one thing.
I mean,
I'm not sure what to say.
Well, I think,
I'm at a little bit of a loss too, because we've been through this so much, and I think you understand where we're coming from. If you don't, if there are questions you have,
Okay.
if we didn't make ourselves clear in the previous meeting and at the site, and there are still questions, by all means, we're happy to answer the questions that could help lead this to a better resolution, but
Right, well, I guess I'll start a little bit. Some of my confusion is a little bit in terminology. No practicable alternative, so I think that language has a lot of room for interpretation, and so I did bring with me, just to help visually, because I thought maybe there'd be a little bit more of a discussion about it, but I did bring the former so-called approved plan, which had, we blew it up. I mean, it's as close as we can. I can show you to scale, so we're really looking at the same thing side by side. Before it was at a different scale. So what we have here, if you were to lay the edge of the house right here, like so, and then here's the barn. And what you can see is that while there is, the hardscape is within that sacred available triangle, there is a ton of disturbance all around. And so you have all this a lot of excavation and not one plant to mitigate this disturbance. You take I'm just gonna go like, our plan, right, green everywhere, this little tiny bit over the line, 117 square feet, less than some of the things that we've seen approved before, less than a shed. Well, is there no practical alternative to a shed being approved? So that's where I get a little, and I don't wanna pick an argument, that's where my confusion lies. So we felt, after exploring alternatives and taking to heart a number of the things that the board said, for example, on the site visit, it was noted, wow, this area is very wet down here, so we brought in our new planting. I didn't render a whole new site plan, we just sort of showed you new line, old line, and then the original line. We moved the pool up, made it smaller, got rid of the spa altogether, so we tried, so I guess we think that this is the most practical alternative that works for this client. And I think that when you're looking, so I guess, again, going back to sort of definitions, if one is talking to a family who wants to expand their home, expand their house, and you say, wow, do you really need that extra bedroom? Or, do they have to, so they say, yes, we really need that. This is the least size we can house our family in. So there's a lot of, I think that, to me, as a layperson, your code gives you the ability to look at what's in the best interest of the wetland in general. And here we provided so much extra, this is clearly a benefit. I mean, that's been proven by not only what we've talked about, but by our wetlands consultant, by even my very first visit with Steve Coleman before we even came before the board. And I said, what do you think of this plan? He said, yes, well, your mitigation is excellent. So that, I think that
Mitigation's never been the issue.
Yeah, no, exactly. So it's right. So you're trying to. So I think that it goes into the language of. Again, we tried our best. The client has spent a lot of money on us, trying to look at ways so that they didn't. While this was approvable or approved, they didn't. It wasn't a practical alternative for them. And I won't spend the time tonight. There's a lot of people waiting, but going over all the reasons. But this plan does not work on a physical level, on an aesthetic level, on an environmental level. There's no question that there is a practicable alternative to putting in 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, to digging up and putting in 12 infiltrators. That has been proven over and over. That is not the most environmentally sustainable approach to drainage.
But
So
the history of this board and what it has historically approved in terms of incursions into buffer, these kinds of infiltrators have been viewed as temporary structures in some ways.
It's not impermeable surface.
Right. And so once they're buried, it's a different kind of situation than talking about the structure of concrete pool.
right, but it's 100 square feet versus in terms of
Well,
the
again,
compaction of the soils and what's good long-term for the rest of the wetland. You're talking about a little over 100 square feet of hardscape encroachment where as opposed to, driving a backhoe over all this thing to create this, I mean,
but that's
and
temporary,
filling up.
that's temporary. That's temporary,
Yeah,
and then.
But there was just lawn on top of it, that's,
Look,
so,
I think we have been through this
No,
back
I
and
know, I
forth,
don't.
but
nobody wants to, I'm just.
what you're basically advocating here is for a balancing test. And there are certain circumstances, and the ordinance even contemplates circumstances if you get to the point where you're going to allow some kind of incursion into the buffer, where a balancing comes into play, developing mitigation, et cetera. But we as a board have to give credence to all of the language that's in the ordinance. And the ordinance is absolutely clear that you don't get to that balancing test unless there is no practical or infeasible alternative. And we can argue over what the meaning of those two words are, but we're the board that enforces this ordinance and has a history of how that language is interpreted, and we'll have to agree to disagree on
Well-
on how that's interpreted and applied here.
Well, with respect, I understand what you're saying, but again, that doesn't seem to be consistent with some of the things that this board has done in the past. And we pointed out, for example, that 34 Hollow Oak Road, where you allowed a patio and a therapy pool with 3,000 square feet of disturbance.
Pool is above ground and removable. Big
And-
difference.
Well, you think it's a big difference, I don't. And then you had the case at 87 Sheether Road where you had 270 square feet of wetland buffer encroached on by a shed. You know, I mean, yeah, you could fill in an in-ground pool too. But the point is that what we're proposing now is more mitigation than currently exists, or would exist with the proposal that was approved with, without needing an approval by your board.
Granted.
So if we're giving more mitigation, then aren't we doing more to prevent or minimize erosion and other impacts on the buffers?
Again, look, and we'll go back and forth, but we don't get to that point. We don't believe we get to that analysis.
Our clients have spent a lot, as was said, our clients spent a lot of money looking at alternatives. They feel that this new alternative that they've submitted is the best that they can do to make it something that's workable for them, to make it worthwhile to undergo the expense that it would take to put this pool in. And the other alternatives, which they spent a lot of money looking at, just doesn't work. And for 117 square foot encroachment by a little piece of this pool, where you would get thousands of square feet of mitigation that you don't have now, seems to me that that's consistent with the intent of the ordinance.
Understood that that's the position you're taking.
I guess there's nothing else to say. So we ask you for a decision.
Do we actually vote to deny it, or do we just not approve it?
That's a good question. I mean, they've applied for a permit, so there has to be a decision. I mean, you gave them the two choices.
Right. Then, based on the applications that have been submitted and revised, based on discussions at previous meetings, discussions at the site visit, and the discussion here tonight, I'll entertain a motion to make a decision on the permit.
That we've been asked to make a decision
Yeah.
by the applicant.
Right.
So moved.
A second.
So I guess the vote is to approve the permit. And any in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
Aye. So the motion, the application for the permit is denied.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Referrals from the planning board, there are two projects that they're making presentations to the board. And
Yeah, they're not really action items for us, right?
there's no action.
I have to go.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a review, I did an initial review for the planning board. You know, we've addressed a lot of concerns from the wetland standpoint. You know, but normally what happens is the planning board will then you for the year.
Would I guess this one next time?
Our town.
He'll get them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Are they gonna be lengthy ones or quickies?
You could tell them they got.
I mean, I don't know, don't because of me, I'm just checking because I gotta head out.
Yeah.
Is your phone on?
And just give us 1 minute.
Okay.
Just give us, yeah. So, just a quick thing with the Homeland Towers, it's a cell tower, and, you know, their regulations really restrict what, you know, the planning board has to essentially accept, you know, the cell tower, and there's a time frame and limited, you know, thing, but there's a lot of wetland disturbance associated with it. It's an isolated area next to the water treatment plant on the, you know, west end of town, in Manila. And, you know, what I had recommended, which we've done in similar Con Edison sites and, you know, substation areas that we've done in the past is instead of doing the wetland mitigation on-site there, is to apply it to you know, a public area. So we did that in the past with Gedney, with, you know, Con Ed did all their mitigation, put the trail in, you know, the walking path along Gedney Pond, you know, that was done as part of the mitigation. So what my recommendation was is to do the same thing, as apply the mitigation at Gedney instead of doing it in an isolated area where it wouldn't benefit, you know, the public at all, because it's, you know, private property. And you know, from a wetland standpoint, it's a pretty mature canopy. There's very little that could be done out of mitigation. And the same thing with the trees. There's very limited area that they can plant new trees, so they're gonna apply in the tree bank, and it would be used in the Millwood area as well. So that's Homeland Tower, and then 767 King is a new residence. It used to be the Boss's residence, but it's one of the last lots of Chislehurst subdivision. And there's, you know, a lot of it is New York City DEP has easements on, you know, the surrounding property, but they're building a state-of-the-home green home. I mean, it's pretty amazing what they're doing. Yeah, but they have some really minor wetland impacts and tree impacts, but it's, you know, it's pretty straightforward. They're both in front of the planning board, so that's why they were referred into.
But you've already reviewed them and made recommendation memos here.
Yeah,
So really, this is just for our,
it's for your benefit.
Right, unless we have a problem with anything that Steve had in the memo.
Yeah, and I sent you my reports, I think if you have a chance to, you know, read them, but, you know, that's kind of the gist of it. You know. So what I would suggest is tell them they only have a certain amount of time. Otherwise, we're 2 hours from now.
Was that their attorney with them?
yeah, the guy was the attorney.
Yeah, she was Polanski arguing.
Yeah.
They were supported tonight compared to the first time.
Okay.
Well, they couldn't have been very surprised.
And I told the architect right from the first meeting, I said, you know, your best solution is to avoid, you know, going in the buffer.
Right, but then the
And
compliance
said
and
that there's no guarantee, even with all the mitigation, that you get past that threshold. And she just, you know, she already said that's what they wanted.
Right. Telling them no was not an option for her.
Right, and I think, you know, obviously, the first thing she said is, well, you know, we got called in because they didn't like the other
Right.
design.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Homeland, what are they gonna tell us? They're gonna tell us that they're building a cell tower?
This is the second time we've seen it before.
Yeah, I showed you it once before. I think the main thing is just to have them, you know, just to, you know, you guys support the concept of the mitigation.
Of mitigation offsite?
Yeah, I mean, you know, they don't need to go into a lot of detail. So,
Then they won't have a problem with it. What do they care where their mitigation goes?
Right.
They're building a cell tower.
They've got a budget.
Right, they're not homeowners, they have no dog in this race, they just want a cell tower.
You didn't have to come all the way, I could just yell.
We figured we'd wait till you're in here before we start yelling.
Sorry for coming in abruptly before.
That's
But I appreciate you having us on. Vincent Xavier, Regional Manager with Homeland Towers.
Hi, how you doing? Jordan Fry from Stewart, Standard Attorney. Yeah.
And Bob Burns, our A&E from All Points.
Do you want us to lay out the plans, or?
I think just a quick, like,
Just
2-minute
stand the boards
overview.
up and talk us through.
Sure,
Sure.
sure. So,
I think we really should just focus on the wetland mitigation, you know,
Okay.
which is the board's, you know, purview.
so, Bob, I'll let you take me through, but basically, Homeland Towers AT&T and T-Mobile proposing a public utility wireless communications facility on town property off of Barnes Lane, which is also adjacent to the Newcastle Stanwood Consolidated Water District plant. And there's a wetland that's right off of Campfire Road. The facility is within the 100-foot buffer over there. There's also a wetland that's to the south, but the applicants worked to reconfigure the facility so as to avoid that wetland to the south. That was, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just don't, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the project. I know Steve's abundantly aware, we've been on site a few times.
We saw the
Okay, we
photos.
just want to reiterate ourselves too much. So you're aware, basically, it's a relatively large lot, but there are two wetlands we were concerned with here. A vernal pool, which was over here.
If you flip it over, it
Yeah,
shows it.
okay, great. So this is the whole lot here. Access road in through this parcel, which we have an access easement on. We originally wanted to go up here, we were gonna be higher, closer to the power lines. But after meeting on site with Steve, we identified this vernal pool, we had it delineated and identified the setback from that. That's a local jurisdiction for that, and we were told that was a more important resource that we should just stay out of, even the buffer for that. So we relooked at the site, came up with a way to stay out of the buffer. You know, unfortunately, that does put us into this other buffer, which is technically a wetland. Really, it's just the water coming off of Campfire Road into kind of a drainage ditch, but it's wet, so it's a wetland. And we cannot go any further to the southeast there because there's a planned future storage, salt storage facility that's gonna be manned by the town. So we're really very limited as to where we could go on the property. Acknowledging that we are within the buffer, we've been trying to find the best way to mitigate any impacts within that buffer.
Bob, why don't you go over there's not gonna be the stormwater rate's actually
You
gonna
want
be
me to walk through the
decreased.
stormwater?
Yeah, why don't you go through the
I'll go
catch
quick.
basin
Yeah,
and
just an overview.
Alright,
They're-
so-
They're pretty familiar with it.
There's an intermittent stream that runs through here. First of all, that we're gonna put in a 15-inch culvert, flared end section, and a riprap outlet protection. As far as the drainage for the road itself, this is a 20-foot paved access drive that will be cross-sloped to one side. We're putting in a bituminous curb along this side with a basin at the end. Basin will have a 2-foot sump. The outlet to the basin is a 6-inch pipe, which will essentially elbow into what we're calling a stone filter trench, which will be another 6-inch perforated pipe, basically laid flat as treatment to the water. Essentially, it's like a leaching field for your septic system. And then the storage itself, or the drainage itself, will be within the stone in the compound. The stone's gonna be 18 inches deep, and then we did perk grates out here, which will allow us to have the stormwater perk into the soils. We're picking up this water here with a grass swale around with some stone check dams to a level spreader, and then there's some silt fence and some hay bale check dam during construction. Reviewed this with Mr. Cioli, and he's on board with the design.
So as I mentioned to the board, the mitigation, what I had recommended was that we look at off-site mitigation in lieu of doing it on-site because of the difficulty of
It just makes the most sense.
and they've indicated they're fully behind that,
Amenable to that.
amenable to that concept, so.
To that end, Steve and I, and hopefully Ike, are gonna be meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock to see what alternative options may exist at Gedney Park that we could design to make the equivalent mitigation there, so.
What we've done in the past, the board remembers for, the Millwood substation and the Millwood firehouse is, we used a ratio of, the formulas are set up by, the Army Corps of Engineers for compensatory mitigation, but every state has different categories for how much per acre, a wetland buffer restoration versus wetland restoration. So those are the numbers we've used in the past, and then we recommend a 1.5 to 1, ratio. So we'll take a look at those numbers tomorrow, and that'll give, a dollar value, and then we can correlate that to what could be done realistically.
So is it gonna be like a
Again,
discrete project, or is it gonna be like a tree bank
Preference
fund?
would be to have it be a discrete project that, that could impact.
Right now, the numbers in the buffer, as far as our impact, is 7,900 square feet.
Mhm.
So that's what we'd be looking to
Yeah, so
offset.
you do that.
And really, as far as Homeland's perspective, whether it's a specific project in Gedney that you want us to design, or just simply put money into a fund and that you use with as you see fit, I think that's the best way, but really we're open to either way that you decide to
Take
go.
a look at both.
Appreciate it,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I know what we've focused on in the past is, the entrance with the pond and, we've, done a lot of improvements. So
No, I take my kids there, I'm from right here, anything we can do to improve it, you're gonna help me as well, so it's great, yeah.
So, and then the same thing, even though the board does not approve the tree, permit, the same situation exists there where we're recommending, they're recommending that they have the tree, instead of on-site, planting, looking to see maybe if you can do a little bit, but the majority would go to the tree bank fund.
Yeah, and again, it's just
And we're
because of the tree
recommending-
canopy here and the mature trees, to try to plant trees, and that just doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
So, whatever the town prefers in that light, we're willing to do. And the road itself, like the 20-foot road, is gonna cause increased trees to be removed and increased design of the water filtration. And really, that was more of a requirement for the future use by the town. Generally, we wouldn't need a 20-foot road.
Or paved.
Or even paved, yeah.
Gravel driveway.
So, but regardless of that, we're still, willing to do whatever's needed to mitigate that or the trees as part of this project, so.
So if the board's comfortable, I can, keep you informed, through Dennis, of what, the mitigation strategy will be and, work those details out so the planning board can.
Yeah, hopefully.
Seems to make sense.
And then what I can do is we'll prepare a memo for, that the board, endorses the concept as well.
We, just so you guys are aware, which I'm sure you are, we have the public hearing on July 16th. So we're hoping to have the plan and everything, at least what we're going to be proposing by then, so we can tell the public, this is our plan and how we're gonna solve it, so.
You said July 16th?
July 16th, yeah.
Okay, so you think a memo to the planning board prior to then?
Prior to that, yeah.
We'll see. Hopefully we'll be productive tomorrow.
Right, yeah,
So,
What
tomorrow.
we're trying to do is, we'll get a plan in place, so that it can be, part of the planning board agenda.
Yeah.
Get that worked out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But we have to push our meeting back. I didn't know this was gonna go this late. We had to or I'll bring coffee or something. But.
But it's nice weather tomorrow.
Yeah, no, it's gonna rain for
It's
like
supposed
4
to
days.
rain all day.
Yeah.
So-
Any other questions for the board?
Nope. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
If obviously if anything comes in the meantime, just let us know.
Sorry for keeping you so late.
It's all good, thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
See you tomorrow, Steve.
Is that had a lot of opposition at cell tower? I didn't know.
What's that?
Is that had a lot of opposition at cell tower?
Actually, it doesn't, which is surprising.
Well,
Because
One word
it's in the
is.
middle of nowhere.
It is, it's at the water treatment plant.
They do.
Somebody's gotta know.
There was
Someone's
one,
gotta
Well, people on
Sure.
Barnes Lane might not
there
like
was one
it since the
homeowner
access.
that wrote a letter,
Really?
but this is the
Why
first
is the
public hearing.
access, why is the access off Barnes and not off Campfire?
Because, it's town-owned property and what they wanted is, they're grading access for the salt shed
Yeah.
in the town because they wanna.
But why is it off a residential street?
Well, it's
Not
not,
off
it's off,
Campfire.
well, it's not, it's off the water, it's off the water department access.
Is that what Barnes
I
is?
thought they said, I thought I read that the access is off Barnes
The
Lane.
problem is they call it Barnes Lane, but it's really not, it's the access for the water.
Oh, it's that unnamed.
It's
oh,
an unnamed
thing.
road.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Sorry, hi
So,
everybody.
welcome. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Nice to see you. Quick question, we had been told we were looking to do a PowerPoint, and we had asked,
And we did everything possible,
Okay.
including the laptop here, and the laptop somehow disappeared.
oh, that's not good.
Yeah,
Well, we have the boards anyway.
so maybe we're gonna have to improvise.
It's okay, we're
and
used
do
to
the
it.
old school way.
We're used to improvising. So my name's Stephen Rabel, I'm with the law firm of McCullough, Goldberger and Stout. This is Lori Bethel, our architect from Blaise Macoid, Dan Thorpe, our landscape architect from LaGuardia, and I'm sure you all know Alan Pilch, who is our engineer. So, I don't know how much history you've received on the property, just as some background. This lot was created in 2001 as part of what was called the Chiselhurst subdivision, it was known as Lot 4. The prior owners received site plan approval for a single-family home in 2002. As a result of that approval, the driveway was constructed along with a bridge, as well as a water line, but the house itself was never built. Our clients, the Kleins, have purchased the property now, so
North is up, so you can see King Street's there. With the wall line.
yeah, the intention is to build a new single-family home. It's a different design, obviously, from what was approved in 2002. But we have designed everything to be within the 2002 clearing and grading limitation line. So Alan will take you through the stormwater, but as you'll see, we've really attempted to design this with sensitivity to the site and this particular parcel. So,
Maybe Dan, you wanna go first on this?
so,
You wanna start here?
Sure.
Whatever works. You tell me.
You know, as the landscape architects on this project, one of the first things we looked at was the existing watersheds on the site and the flow of the flow channels on the site and how water moves across the site and down towards the reservoir. And there's two major corridors of water that move through the site. One goes under the bridge, and this is, I don't know if anybody's been to the site, but there's an existing bridge here. So there's two major flow channels that flow around our building site. And so most of what we've designed towards is on the fundamentals of erosion control and restabilizing the site after the home is built. So through creating crushed stone up along the building, where we see most of the erosion of those flow channels, and these blue arrows represent those, most of the erosion becoming problematic, we're proposing crushed stone coursing along the edges of the building and along the edges of all the infrastructure, paired with a lot of revegetation using native grasses and ground covers to restitch the slopes back together after the work is done. So a lot of, I mean, it's the limit of grading and clearing line is pretty tight to the site infrastructure, so the landscape is really close to the house, and it's really about putting the parts and pieces back together. A lot of that has to do also with stormwater control.
Can I make one point? This blue line is the wetland buffer line
Yeah.
off of Whippoorwill Lake, and this is the other wetland buffer line as well. So I just want to point it out.
If you could just highlight what the buffer disturbances are, so the board's aware,
Yeah.
of the encroachment.
Draw on here. So the current encroachment is
First of all,
from,
the bridge is here.
yeah.
This is the bridge location as it crosses the channel.
So we're looking at the encroachment basically as the area from the end of the bridge, because the bridge is already constructed, to this red line. So it's really here.
So it's really just for access to the upland location.
And I should say that location was dictated both by the existing or the approved clearing grading limit line, and the site itself has a conservation easement, so which is fairly limited. I think that the site's almost 13 acres, and of that about 2.6 acres are
is outside the conservation easement.
right. So that the designated building envelope.
Yeah, and so a lot of what we've done around the site and on the planting plans you'll see is we're revegetating these disturbed areas with native plants that tie back into the existing ecology of the woodland, American beech, red maple, gray birch, all things that all the red dots are trees that need to be removed for one reason or another due to the construction, but we are revegetating with a substantial amount of new trees And that goes all the way back down to the street.
Right. And those are all new trees along the route from King Street to the bridge.
So from.
How long is that drive?
900 feet at least,
Yeah.
1,000 feet, something like that.
The bridge?
No,
No,
not
the driveway.
The driveway is probably about 900 feet or
I
so.
think it's like 800 something,
Yeah.
900, yeah.
It's around there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a long way.
And it was all part of the Chislehurst subdivision, and New York City DEP stepped in and, purchased a lot of it with conservation easements. Yeah, so-
Just our subdivision with 129 acres, it created 3 building lots.
Yeah.
This is the last of the building
The
lots.
original subdivision was for 24 lots, I think, so. And each of the properties is, really nice estate properties and,
Is that one of them, the property that just went to auction? Is that
No.
around that neighborhood?
No,
I
that's
don't
different.
think so. Yeah, I don't think it's in.
That's a separate,
Yeah.
same kind of idea.
One thing we asked for clarification was the original driveway construction, we had the wetland mitigation plan. Were we able to find out whether that was ever signed off or
Oh,
implemented?
that was never implemented.
Okay, so you're planning on
This is,
addressing that as part of,
this replaces, in essence, what, there are a lot of trees that we plant here, there's a lot of herbaceous materials that
so
we
you-
plant.
so you're,
And it really makes sense, given where the driveway is, to do this.
okay, so probably what you need to do then is just also include the disturbance for when that crossing was created, and just add that to your mitigation. I think you'll be fine, because you're doing, extensive
I
planning.
think we did that.
We did that,
We did that
yeah.
calculation.
Okay.
Yeah.
That should just be included in your next
Sure.
submission for the planning board, just to, so that issue can be, taken care of on that.
Okay.
Show the math.
Yeah, just show the math there, because, as you know, the board usually wants to separate out tree replacement versus wetland mitigation.
Right,
And so just as long as you've got that covered, you're fine.
right, to some extent, some of the tree planting is part of the mitigation. Mitigation before was tree planting
Yeah.
and shrub planting.
Yeah.
And this has tree planting and a lot of herbaceous planting, so
Okay.
it's, in essence, it sort of covers it. And there's a lot more trees here being planted than there were in the original mitigation
Yeah.
plan that was
Sure.
done
Yeah.
for
It's much more
Oakland
expensive,
Plazas.
yeah.
Yeah, it actually.
Is the driveway being redone, or is that existing to remain?
It's gonna be redone,
It's gonna be resurfaced.
Kind.
resurfaced, I should say, yeah.
So it's an existing asphalt driveway that
No,
just
no,
needs-
no, no,
Gravel.
Gravel.
gravel, and it's kind of like overgrown
Yeah.
now. So it will be a permeable driveway. We've discussed, potential materials for it, like permadrive, and there's another.
Filter pave.
Filter pavement. It'll be some type of permeable, it's required to be a permeable pavement by the resolution, and it will be. So that's part of the
Do
plan.
you have to get DEP approval again, or is it?
We need, there's only an IRSP that's required, individual residential stormwater permit.
Okay.
It's no longer a stormwater pollution prevention plan with them. And the only reason that is required is that there's an impervious surface within 100 feet of a regulated water course, where the bridge is. For just getting from the bridge up to the house site, that's why it's required.
Just for the board's benefit, I should talk a little bit about the unique qualities of the building. I think
Sure,
that'd be
yeah.
Beneficial.
So when we started this project, our design objective was really to treat the site as sensitively as possible. And with that in mind, we created a scheme in which we have 2 series of stacked volumes that run parallel to the contours of the existing landscape. So the idea is that we can kind of terrace down existing grade rather than trying to carve out and impose something on top of it. Green roofs are a really important part of our scheme, and Alan can speak to those in greater detail, but they comprise about 40% of the overall covered area of the building. This is just an elevation view. from the front side, so this is facing away from the lake. This would be from the rear. And materially, we also wanted to relate to the existing context, to kind of treat this in a restrained way. We definitely not want like a white modernist box, but something that blends in.
No Richard Meyer, huh?
No Richard Meyer, no, not this time. And here you can start to see one of those flow channels that Dan had mentioned previously, that address runoff.
So what's nice about it is it's using, natural means to accomplish stormwater.
Little
Instead of
more
putting
Frank
it-
Lloyd Wright than Richard Meyer.
Instead of putting it.
This is a cross-section that we did in collaboration with Lori's office, showing how the building terraces with the slope. Again, trying to work with the land instead of against it.
Here, you can see, this might be a little far apart, I'll just pass this around, but there's a series of plans here that indicate, we've actually reduced the overall footprint so that we have a little bit more of a buffer between the limit of clearing and grading and the actual foundation.
I'll just say there's no direct wetland impacts that are being proposed as well. The only impact is through in the wetland buffer, and it's really just for the access. As Dan said, from the access from the bridge up to the building site. And that's really it. And we are using, as Lori said, green roofs are part of the stormwater management plan as well for treatment, in accordance with Chapter 5 of the Stormwater Management Design Manual. Other parts of the roof runoff is conveyed into planters between the house and the driveway. Actually, on the other side of the bridge.
One is. What year storm event do you one is?
What's that?
What year type of storm event are you looking at for water flow in that channel?
For
flow channel? Well, the stormwater management plan is designed for up to the 100-year storm. That's how it's done.
So it's a 100-year storm?
Yeah, it is a 100-year storm. And I'll just say from stormwater management perspective, we have stormwater planters for parts of the roof that aren't green roofs. But on the other side of the bridge. So I said, the other side of the bridge, in the original plan, basically all there were from the bridge to King Street were just some level spreaders to just filter the runoff. But this plan actually incorporates 2 rain gardens as well, which capture and treat the water quality volume. And the rest of it is actually designed using tree planting to I'll say mitigate the water quality impacts. And so both are, you use tree planting to reduce the area of impervious cover. And there's enough tree planting here to actually reduce it to below 0. So from the bridge to King Street, that's how it's mitigated, both in rain gardens and through tree planting.
And we're gonna take a look at diversifying the
We did.
species.
Yeah, we went back through, you can see the different colors now on the plan, Steve.
Okay.
We've introduced more white oak
Okay, good.
and red maple. And we also lowered the caliber of the trees from 6 to 4 inches, but added many more. But I like that idea. I think the trees will establish more successfully coming in a little smaller.
Yeah.
But again, the whole idea is to bring the existing forest and woodland and all of the native ecology that's existing on site right up to the house. So a lot of it, it's a largely, almost entirely native palette of plant materials that, so it's not just isolated to the wetland mitigation moments, it's throughout the entire site.
Yeah, the planning board's been very supportive, this project, we really
Sure.
like it, conceptually, yeah. Any questions though? Sorry you weren't able to do your PowerPoint. I mean, we were planning on it.
Leaves more to the imagination.
But this worked out pretty well.
Yeah. But I mean, in terms of, wetlands, it's very minimal, impact, so. Yeah, but
What's the bridge made of?
Wood and steel.
Yeah. It's actually got a wood grate, if you will, or
Wood deck,
deck.
yeah.
Is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
The rest of it's just steel. And it was built in mid-2000s, right? Like
Yeah, I
five
think
or
it's
six?
2005 or
Right.
2006, yeah. There's a guy by the name of Terry Bosses owned the property and built the bridge and then never went any further.
Right, that's as far as it went.
Yeah.
And he built a couple, a couple of culverts that were also constructed just to get there, but that was it. And a couple pipes or whatever. I'll say, I actually worked on this project from the original Chiselhurst subdivision through the site development plan approval for Terry Bosses, so, that's, my history goes back a long time on this project.
So this is the type of project that would be great if every applicant came in with, these design concepts.
Well, this building is so unique, it's
Yeah,
terrific,
yeah.
it really is.
What type of heating cooling systems do you think from that for the house?
We haven't gotten that far yet.
Geo?
I don't think we have enough area to put in geo.
Oh, but also ledge and rock, I mean, it's
Yeah,
a tough one to get
that
to.
too.
Yeah. You can't really do solar either, but because of the canopy.
We have a solar array on the roof, which I think works well with where we will have some clearing because of the house itself.
Yeah, so it'll be facing straight up more or less, right?
Yeah.
Green roof is a really good insulator, actually, too.
Yeah. The solar array is really just this part of the building.
Correct, yeah.
The green
just
roof
the
is the green sections here.
Until the birds like your sedums and then.
We don't have a lot of issue with that.
We did one green roof and I don't know, there was one sedum that the birds ate and you could see the waves of strips were just eaten, left alone, eaten, left alone.
Really?
The thing was tasty, huh?
It was just funny, it was.
I hadn't heard that.
That's interesting, yeah. Anything else?
No? Any other questions?
And so we'll follow up with a memo, that'll be combined with mine for, the next planning board meeting.
So will that then be sort of your board's official recommendation back to the planning board? Okay, and just out of curiosity, would we anticipate that by the July 2nd public hearing?
You're on the agenda for July 2nd? I have to do a memo, so I would say yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time. I know it's late.
Looks like a great project, thanks for waiting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Anything else on the agenda?
You have one more second.
Oh, thank you.
So, let me just express a welcome to Dennis Corelli on the record.
Welcome, Dennis. Good luck.
Good luck. Yep, look forward to working with you. Hope you weren't completely overwhelmed tonight.
Took a lot of notes, I'll say that.
I wasn't here at 8 o'clock for the required worker training this morning, so
It's been a long
It's a
day.
big first day, right? Is Dennis the new?
This is the new environmental coordinator.
Oh, okay. Hello.
Oh,
Very good.
welcome.
Thank you.
So, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye. Good night.